Hi, this is a video on profile as it comes out of human design. So it's essentially a new examination or a new way of looking at profile, which is an important part of human design. And this presumes that you know at least a little bit about it or you've heard of human design. However, I've been encouraged by my business partner to share stories. And so I'm going to give you a background, a story, part of the story of my life, because it is going to set up what I'm going to share with you with profiles, but it's also going to give you a glimpse into where I am going with human design. Now, and it'll give you the background to understand why I'm doing the way that I'm actually going to be doing it now and in the months and years ahead. Now, I was brought up in a quality school, a high-class school, you might call it, studied at university, science, mathematics, and majored in geology and geophysics, and worked in geology and geophysics a little bit and in science laboratories, and then took off on a whole journey of discovering something more, something better, something that really motivated me and opened up my heart and felt in sync with who I was. And that took quite a number of years. And when I'd established a foundation in that, the basis that I based most of my development on suddenly withdrew. And it was because I was ready to get out there and stand on my own 2 feet. So at the time, it was a little bit like, what? But in retrospect, it was very, very good guidance and a very good thing to happen. And at that time, I was trying to understand, well, what's going on in my life? And I happened to go and talk to a friend of mine who did astrology, who recommended that I see a person he knew who did numerology. Now, from my background, which was basically, traditional conservative upbringing, traditional religious background, university training, science, and all of that, it was like, this was a bit odd, but I was looking for something different. And I went along to the numerologist, and I thought it was great what he said. So I went and looked at 1 or 2 things on numerology, and I just shook my head and said, nah, this can be done better. And in 3 months, literally from no background whatsoever, I reinvented numerology and created a whole, or innovated numerology and brought it right up to date and made it work in a way that truly worked for me. And that was the launching of my consulting career, because that's what I did. I started off with consultations like that. Now, with a background in science and business, and my ancestry was very high level business, my father, my grandfather, major business people. And with my understanding of that, I started blending it together and saying, how can the 2 things blend together and really improve each other in a way that people can relate to on an everyday basis? And one of the things that I discovered and developed in numerology, or in working with numbers, because I never limited it to numerology. I taught maths at secondary and tertiary level, mathematics, and I taught science and chemistry. So I brought those in. And one thing I got from looking at numerology and, getting down to the fundamentals was this. a number on its own is just a number, means it's not complete. It needs a context. Just like real estate, it needs location, location, location. In other words, if I told you I used to live in a house number 38, it doesn't tell you anything. But if I gave you 38 Oxley Station Road, Oxley, Brisbane, Australia, you could go on Google Maps and look that place up right now. You know, you'd know where I used to live. You'd be able to go and knock on the door. You'd be able to find it from anywhere in the world because you had the number and the location, or what I used to call position. What is the position of that number? Because the position of that number dictates the whole context that that number's talking about. It all of a sudden, that number gives you really accurate, practical, useful information. And back in the early 2000s, I wrote a book. You might be able to see it front ways or back ways, but it's called Action, Attraction, Integration. And it was putting together all the principles I learned from working with numbers, including what I just said. And it turned out, in retrospect, to be the theme behind everything that I've ever worked on. You know, doing, receiving, giving, receiving, and bringing it all together. And this is where we're working on rebranding all my work, including the work I do with human design. And what I loved about human design is it was so practical, and it is so practical, and it's so specific. And it really brings a lot of the ideas and spiritual and idealistic and alternative concepts that I developed over years, over decades, and shows how it works in the real world and how to get the energy and the timing right, and how to deal with the fact that no matter how idealistic we are, every single one of us is utterly different in the way we operate, and significantly different in the way we make decisions. And so it really brought that down to earth and made it work for me in my real life. All the stuff that I'd learned for decades, whether it was science, mathematics, business, sport, which I took a lot of time in, or spiritual things, metaphysical things, old ideas like, you know, Chinese culture, Indian culture, all the ideas that come from there that are spiritual and practical, all the current innovations that are going on in the world with technology, science, philosophy, psychology. It brought it all together and explained how relevant that was to me, the way I operate in my life in the physical world, and how those things, how I can pick and choose what really supports me and benefits me and aligns with me when I'm dealing with real life situations, you know, like families, relationships, making money, building a business, taking care of my health, training in sport, you know, designing a business, choosing people to work with and how to work with them, and how, what I bring to the table, what they bring to the table, where's the support we need to, you know, where's the support that we need to enable us to do what we do best, how to get the highest and best use out of the gifts that you have. You know, it brought all that together very, very practically, and it still continues to do so to this day. So with all of that I've said, this video I'm going to call The Power of Profile, because I want to look at the profile in a human design chart. in the information that human design gives to you. Now, just so you get an idea what the hell profile means technically, and then I'll give you a clear idea what it means practically. But for those of you who know human design, those of you only new to it, those of you who've never heard of it, this is a human design chart. Okay, this happens to be mine, and there's all sorts of other ones, you know, all over the place, various different designs, ways that people are made up, you know, they vary all the time. Now, the thing about profile that makes profile so useful is it comes from this very top thing here, which represents the energy of the sun in your life at birth and 88 days before birth. It comes from that. Now, that's just technically what goes on. You can see up here, it's a symbol that means the sun. And this is the energies that were present at the time you were born. And this one over on the other side is the energies that were present 88 days, more or less, it's an exact time, before you were actually born. These are like two different astrology charts for those of you who know about astrology. The profile is really, really helpful because the way I describe it, it's not the way it's been normally put out there. The way I describe it is it's your predictable tendencies. Whatever's going on in your life, there's a strong probability that you'll default to this type of approach. And let me explain why. In other words, it's something that's predictable about you. It's not absolute, it's not fixed, but it's a predictable tendency, a default thing that you'll tend to work with. So let me go back to the chart and point out why. This is the sun at birth. This is the sun before birth. At the sun before birth, it indicates when the structure of your physical body stabilized and took it, you might say, hardwired itself while you were in the womb, so that there is a particular design to the way in which your body operates. And that's outlined down here, and it's marked there in red, but you don't have to worry about that. That's marked here. The personality is when you took your first breath at birth. And that's when your personality, not so much your body structure, but the structure of your personality was hardwired or locked in. And so your design, your overall design is a combination of the design of your body and the design of your personality working together. Right? The two things not only are designed to cooperate, they need to. And this is an important thing to make sure that's going on in your life, that your body and your personality are actually working together. You could call it body and mind, because your personality is largely, in a lot of ways, a construct of your mind, or at least the design of your personality sets up the way your mind operates, not necessarily your brain, but the way your way of looking at the world and the awareness that you have of the world is set up. Okay, so Why the sun? Why couldn't you look at any of the other things? Energetically, both our design and our personality, the sun is such a big influence in our solar system that the energy that comes from the sun has a really significant impact on both your design and your personality. In fact, if you were to give it a figure, a statistic, it's 70% of the energy that makes you up. So 70% of the energy in your physical body is influenced, is, you might say, sourced from the sun. What happened even when you were in the womb. And 70% of the energy of your personality in the practical world is sourced from the sun, as it was. The energy that you absorbed at birth, 70% of that energy you absorbed at birth was sourced in the sun. 70% of the energy that your design absorbed when it locked in while you're in the womb was sourced in the sun. Now, the practical, we can debate all that, but the practical side of that is this. Whatever the sun energy is in both those places is 70% of your personality and 70% of your body, which means that is a significant influence, a really strong influence. So that would give you a strong clue as to what are the predictable tendencies that you have. Now, let's go back to the chart. So originally the profile was developed because of the strength of the sun in both those charts. But the numbers here change all the time. Behind that number, you've got 5.2. And here you've got 64.4. Now, those points are made up of 6 different possibilities. You can have a 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. There's only 6 possibilities. And it doesn't matter which number here, 5 to 6, from 1 to 64 is there. You're going to have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And so that is much easier to work with because it tells you, they call it the line, but whatever the number, they call it the gate, but whatever the gate, the line, the number behind the gate, I just want to keep this simple without jargon if I can. The number behind the number, its position is 1 associated with the sun, right? So it's powerful. And that number behind the gate is, you might say, the default process. Whichever gate you have, whatever number that turns up in, you're going to relate to that from either a 1 perspective or a 2 perspective or a 3 perspective or a 4 or a 5 or a 6. And you'll tend to operate from that point. Now, when the originators of human design put this together, they said, what's the context for that number? And what they chose was Chinese, it's not philosophy, Chinese, the way the Chinese operated using a thing called the I Ching. That was their practical numerology or their practical science for looking at the environment, human behavior, how societies worked, how things should unfold. That was their system for doing that. And each component of that system, and they had 64 of them, they divided into 6 lines. And each of those lines, as they call them, was that number operating from the first level or the second level or the third level or the fourth, fifth or sixth levels. Now here's where my numerology came in, because all the interpretations of what a profile is, because you'll either have you'll have 1 to 6 from your personality and 1 to 6 from your design. So my profile is 2 in the personality and 4 in the design. So it could be 5-1 or 6-3. There's 12 possibilities there, 12 different profiles that are possible in any person's makeup. Now this is where it gets interesting, because you had to interpret those profiles based on a certain context, and they chose the I Ching as the basis of that. And in the past, the Chinese and various other systems said, well, there's the good use of it and the bad use of it. And they took old traditional approaches, which I don't have a problem with, as long as you realise they're based on the way things worked a while ago, not necessarily relevant to what's happening right now, but there's certainly wisdom to be gained from that and insight to be gained from that. And they took those as the basis of the interpretation. And practically, they brought, number 1 was about investigating. Number 2 was about doing what comes naturally. Number 3 was about trial and error. And those first 3, what was predictable is they're about you. And if it's 1, you'd be predictably someone who investigates, right? It's a predictable tendency. You know, my business partner has a 1-3 profile, which means his personality, what's predictable about it is he will investigate. Now, 3 years of us being best friends has made that crystal clear. Even he admits it, you know, because it's true. He investigates everything. He's got a lot of other ones in his makeup as well. So he's a real investigator. His personality is always investigating. I've got a 2-4, which means my personality does things more naturally. That's the way it was originally interpreted, and it's true. I mean, this video, it's just, I'm doing my thing naturally. You know, it's just predictable about me. A 3, it means you will tend to be more, let's give this a shot and see if it works, trial and error. But you learn a lot through trial and error, and eventually you figure out the way things work, whether it's money or business or your health or sport or anything like that. You through trial and error get to know how things really work. Whereas I go, hey, this is what's just come to me naturally and I'm just doing this video. Maybe it's too long, maybe it's too short. There's all this advice I get, but hey. And I take that advice, by the way, but what's predictable is, given the room, I'll just go until I feel it's finished and then it'll be done. That's my personality. Now, 4, 5, and 6 were very much focused. The focus then turns, the predictable focus is you'll turn towards others. And 4 is you look for the opportunity to get to know others, sort of like 1, investigating. 5 is you look for the opportunity to take the lead, you know, get out there and really be creative and stand up there and help others, in a sense, by leading. And 6 is very much about, well, been there, done that, because for the first 30 years of my life, I'd made every mistake in the book. Then I spent 20 years looking at what the hell did I learn from that. And now by the time I'm in my 50s and 60s, been there, done that, but I can help you out if you're going to be going through that sort of stuff. So that's the way it was interpreted based on the I Ching. I'm going to propose right now shifting the position, still focusing on profile being your predictable tendencies, but looking at it from 2 points of view. One of them is 1 to 6, what that means archetypically, using archetypes. And it's going to be very practical. And the second is going to be using something out of the legend, the Arthurian legend, the legend of Merlin and Arthur, which is something I've studied extensively, really deeply, and know really well. I've even told the story in various countries in the world. And that is a source of incredible practical wisdom. So let's look at the Arthurian legend. And out of that, I'm going to take the Knights of the Round Table. And I'm only going to deal with the first 6. Now, the 6 knights, the first 6, what happened is Merlin taught Arthur to be a cool human being, to be a man who could stand up and lead and truly be a person of dignity and integrity. And he taught him 12 lessons, but just like learning human design, learning it's not going to do you much good. It'll at least open you up to the possibilities and give you some practice at it. But what had to happen with Arthur after that, once he got exposed as being the new king, when he pulled the sword out and everybody lumped that on him, Arthur had to bring peace to that land, which was in a mess at the time. Southwest England in general was in a mess because the Romans had taken off 50 years ago and it was just chaos. So Arthur had to fight 12 battles to establish peace in the land and actually demonstrate his leadership. Because even at the beginning, the knights were like, well, not the knights, just the population was going, geez, he's really young and, I don't know whether, okay, we're in his army, but can he really do this? So he fought these 12 battles and each one required a particular quality to win. To solve each dilemma to win the battle. A certain quality was what swung the result in Arthur's favour. And as the battle unfolded, one of the soldiers stepped up and brought that quality to the field. The first battle was honesty. It took honesty. You had to just look at it and see it as it was and do what needed to be done. And a certain soldier stood up because that was his nature and helped turn the battle. And the second one required loyalty. And guess what? Someone stood up at the important point because they demonstrated that quality of loyalty. And Arthur was able to identify that in them and ask them to step up and support them in stepping up, put all his authority behind them. And it took those 12 battles, and that's how the Knights of the Round were self-selected. That's how you qualified, or that's how they qualified. And Arthur, having those qualities already within him, was able to recognise that and support them in turning the tide of battle in each of the 12. And just like in real life, to win the 12th one took humility. Just when you think you know it all, realising you don't. So the first 6 really set up the foundation. And this is what I'm going to use for profile. So whatever your profile is, if you know it, check this against real life. So the first, number 1, in your predictable tendencies. Now you've got to give it the context, like the address. What are we talking about here? The line behind your energy in your personality, the most significant energy in your personality. In other words, what's predictable? What's the process, the predictable process behind whatever number, whatever gate, whatever energy your sun has? Know whether it's 1, 2, 3 to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 64, but what type of 64, what type of 33, what type of 13 is it going to be? Is it going to be an investigative one, or a natural one, or a trial and error one, or a leadership one, you name it? Well, here's a different way of looking at it. If you've got one in your profile, honesty, what's predictable about you is you'll flourish when one of your defaults, whether it's in your personality or in your design, is honesty. The predictable default, if it's 2, is loyalty. If it's 3, it's nobility. If it's 4, it's virtue or strength. If it's 5, it's grace, to do what comes naturally to you. And if it's 6, it's truth, which is different than honesty. Now, when I look at my profile, and I'll go into what each of these mean, I've got profile 2 and 4, and it's actually written over here on this chart, 2, 4, which what's predictable about me when I'm living my design is that I'll be loyal and virtuous. In other words, I have loyalty and real strength. But if I'm not living my design, I'm not using my strategy and inner authority, it may show up as a form of disloyalty and a form of weakness, feeling insecure, weak, and betraying myself. Now, that doesn't mean I have to be doing it mentally. It can be just living as who I'm not and trying to fit in with other people. You know, with my business partner, 1 and 3, honesty and nobility. Now, let's go through, and you can see going on with my partner, virtue and honesty. With my partner's brother, virtue and truth. Now, he doesn't know anything about all this sort of stuff, but it's still there. But it can be weakness and not being true. So to help you understand why I find this so useful, let me go through what is honesty, what is loyalty, what is nobility. And I won't go into it really in depth because I could, and I will, and I do when I work with people in consultations and stuff like that. But I want to give you, this is just an introduction. You know, we're going to put out information books and everything on this in the future. But I want to at least get your feedback. And does this sort of gel with you on some level when you look at your profile? Or if you don't know much about human design, it'd be like, gee, that'd be useful to know. You know? So honesty is not just telling the truth. You know, it's openness and innocence. And being able to act with a sense of not openness like, oh, I'm open to everything. It's like open to what's going on and doing what needs to be done. innocence doesn't mean, oh, I'm just a new age open person. No, openness means I'm open and I'm innocent. I don't go and judge. I do what needs to be done. Just like a child. The first thing, open, I'm hungry. That's honest, right? Open and speaks up. Goes crawling across the room. Oh, let's go exploring. I've got to do something. That's honesty. It's in adults, it's a very, very, very powerful and assertive quality that archetypically, and I'm bringing in that because I'm not going to do a whole other lecture, I'm going to wrap it up now, but archetypically, it's the quality that enables to turn negativity into positivity. Because honesty, openness, and innocence in the way that you act can transform negativity. You know, people who are very honest often just blow, oh, don't talk about that. Everybody keeps quiet about that. You know, the king has no, the emperor has no clothes. Whoops, honesty. Loyalty, the willingness to be open, to be vulnerable, because it flows from honesty, the ability and the willingness to be vulnerable to your strengths and your weaknesses. By vulnerable, I don't mean like letting your weaknesses run your life. That's not vulnerable. Vulnerable means I'm aware of my weaknesses and I'm willing to transform them and transmute them, because I'm honest, you know, into strengths. And I'm aware of my strengths and I'm not going to hide them or pretend they're not there just so I don't upset somebody else or I don't rock the boat. Loyalty is really valuing and owning, just like money, valuing and I own it, you know, valuing and owning everything about yourself and developing that so it becomes an asset. So if you've got 2 in your profile, it's natural for you. Being natural is recognizing and acknowledging, owning the good, what people used to call the good and the bad side, and turning them into assets. Being vulnerable with your weaknesses, as many of us did in the alternative culture, but even more so be vulnerable to your strengths, because that's what you bring to the table. Nobility, line 3. You know, when you think of the high side of nobility, they are people with certain gifts, talents, but they live for something more than themselves. In the Arthurian times, the nobility would walk among, you know, the everyday folk, not to show off, not to look down on them like people often do in politics and stuff like that. But they walk among everyday people in order to be an example of what's possible, to be an inspiration, to communicate, to share ideas, to uplift them. Nobility was meant to be something where ordinary people could connect with something that they could possibly become and learn how to do it. So to be noble is to bring out the very best of you. You remember the weaknesses into strengths and the strengths owning them, and then you go and use those strengths for the benefit. You express them. You don't keep them to yourself. You share them with others. That's nobility. Virtue is not being prissy or, you know, it's being strong. It comes out of respecting feminine energy and allowing it to empower you so that you are strong. It's really the effect that feminine energy has on masculine energy when the two work together and the feminine empowers the masculine, it becomes strong. And that manifests not just as physical muscles, it certainly can, but it manifests as strength of character, of not only serving people or sharing, how good life has been to you with everyday people, but doing it in a way that nurtures them, that respects them, that enables them to build a real foundation in their life. Like family does, mother and father in family. The old 10 Commandments, one of them was honour thy father and thy mother. And Daryl explained to me yesterday there's a benefit to that added on. Honour thy father and thy mother so they can benefit you and you can have a great life. I'm paraphrasing. The role of mothers and fathers is nobility. The role of the family is to create a noble environment. And so 4, you're looking for the opportunity to become strong. And archetypically, it's turning insecurity and ego putting you down into strength. Telling the ego to stop putting you down and really becoming strong because you nurture yourself. So that's virtue, that's the opportunity there. And the 5th line, the 5th night is grace. Now, grace is doing what comes naturally to you, but in a way that you can graciously give of that to other people. It's called, in simple practical terms, enjoying your life in a way that other people can share in it. It's like being a king or a queen. It's just radiating your good fortune and your vitality and the joy to all your subjects. But for everyday people, that means doing what comes naturally to you, doing those things where you shine and taking the lead in those areas where what you bring to the table really contributes. Being the shining light where your light shines. And then 6 is truth. The night of truth. The one light, the one night, the one, oh, there's so many jokes there. The one night who you could rely on to be straight and true. A straight shooter. Someone who tells it like it is, not like they wish it would be. An arrow flies true when it flies from the bow straight to the target. Someone is true when they come right from themselves and they're living the life they're designed to live. And when you've got a 6th line, particularly in your profile, it's predictable that once you mature and become an adult, you'll be an example, because archetypically, 6 is about reconnecting to love, remembering at the foundation of everything, there is love. Love is the key. And connecting back to love. Practically, when you've got an analytical, practical mind, great, but don't disconnect from your body. Make sure your body and your mind work together. For those of you who know about astrology, Virgo, it's an earth sign, but it's really analytical by nature. Well, here, it's about being true. And each phase of each gate leads up to connecting you with love and making sure practically that your mind and body are working together most effectively, because that is when what you do will be true. It'll hit the target. It'll be delivered with real love, not idealistic love, but real love. Therefore, it'll be truly powerful. It'll work, it'll make a difference, and it will help people. So this is how I look at the profile, from a different perspective, to give different dimensions to what's predictable. It doesn't take away from Ra's interpretation or the original interpretation. It adds a new dimension to it. It expands, because I'm identifying Ra looked at it from this point of view, and the people who worked with him. He was the originator of human design, for those of you who don't know. He worked with it from the I Ching perspective and from the scientific perspective as he understood it. I'm looking at it from a more how things worked. You know, the Arthurian legend is a map, not of something that happened 1,500 years ago. I call it the pilot program of what we have to do, go through and establish today. They ran a pilot program. Now, it's the time in history we're at is the series is going to be released. This is the movie or the full TV series. You know, Camelot was the pilot, and it contains within it so many lessons that apply to what works now. Each of you has 2 gifts in your profile. 1 gift in your personality, 1 gift in your design, in your body, that's predictable. It's not the only thing about you, but it does describe what people can, when you're living your design, what is predictable? What is predictable if you have a 1-3 profile is that your personality is, when you're living your design, can be honest and noble. No BS, inspiring other people by the way you hold yourself, by the character and the dignity, by sharing who you are with others. And that means what you've learned. See, 2 has taught you that it's no problem sharing where you failed and where you succeeded, because your failures led you to be strong and your successes showed you where you already were strong, and both of them help you become stronger. If you've got a 6-3 profile, what's predictable is truth and nobility. A 6-2 profile, truth and your body. And now I'm just playing with this, and you can work, rather than me giving you my interpretation, I'd really encourage you to work with this yourself. And if you want to go further or explore, contact me, do a consultation, or, do something in conjunction with me where we just fine tune this, bring it into your business or into your teaching in some sort of way. And we can really show how it doesn't take away from the original interpretation. It just expands the possibilities and makes it even easier to understand and more practical and relevant to everyday people. I've got 4. This is an opportunity to make other people strong through drawing upon my own strength and sharing it. And I wouldn't be loyal to myself if I didn't do it. That's predictable about me, and it's something that I've had to own and come to terms with, but it's really good when you do. This isn't all of you. It's a dimension of you. It's a predictable dimension. It's the one that's most likely because there's more energy behind it than all the others. It tends to be a default. And in your case, owning that, because it is part of your design, your personality and your design, the whole thing put together, because it's defined there in you. It's not just predictable, like habitual in a bad way. It's habitual it's a good habit to unleash in yourself because it's already there waiting to be unleashed. And that's why I focus so much on experiential human design, or experientially getting in touch with your design, because that'll enable you to understand others, but it's going to make a massive difference in your life. So let's wrap it up there. Naturally, I just feel that's enough for today, but I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope it gives you a new perspective. And we're going to be doing this, through the branding, action, attraction, integration, which at the moment we're calling living with power and purpose. I like that myself, apart from the fact it resonates with my name. But action, attraction, integration, living with power and purpose. We're going to be taking human design and making it simpler and easier to understand, not by negating what's been done, but building upon it. And, just shifting the position without changing the meaning. Because the profile will always be your predictable tendencies. Something about you that's a process that's really predictable. It's one that comes to the front, and it's one you should rely on. But we can make this more fun to understand, easier to understand, more applicable in people's real life. And most of all, the interpretations come from real life experience. I would not share any of this if I hadn't put years of experience into it, both in understanding the Arthurian legend, in understanding human design, in understanding numbers, and in understanding my life. Decades and decades of my life. That's what makes this powerful, and that's what we need to pass on to our children and share with each other. Because when it's done that way, human design and understanding your design will be seen as something really down to earth, really valuable, and something worth embracing, and something that really benefits people, which it does. Okay, that's enough. Talk to you again later.